Welcome to the Regents Roundtable. I'm Stephen Ludwig. My guest today is Sue Henderson. Sue was the president of New Jersey University for 10 years between 2012 and 2022. She was the first woman to serve in that role. Previously, she was the chief operating officer and vice president of institutional advancement at Queens College, a member of the City University of New York system. She's the past vice chair of the influential NCAA Board of Governors and served as chair of the NCAA Division III President's Council in 2019 to 2020. In the summer of 2021, she was named chair of the NCAA's Board of Governors Committee to promote cultural diversity and equity. Additionally, Sue has served as the chair of the board of directors of the Hispanic Association of Colleges, is a member of the Committee on International Education of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. There's just a lot of words here that I'm getting through. Serves on the International Commission of the American Council of Education and is a former commissioner for the Middle States Commission on Higher Education and Accreditation Agency. And the list of accomplishments and board membership goes on and is equally impressive. Sue, thanks for joining me and being here today.
Thank you so much.
Great. Well, let's just jump in. While you were at New Jersey, you helped bring about what's called a reverse transfer program and a dual admit program with community colleges. Can you explain what those are and why they're important?
So I'll start with a bit of a background. I started my collegiate academic career at a two-year institution. And what we found is that students, it took them a while to figure out how to maneuver their 2 years at the community college and then 2 more years at the four-year institution. Some students obviously only wanted to do the 2 years, but some were interested in all 4. And so when I got to NJCU, we noticed that there were students who were coming to us from the community colleges who had not finished their associate's degree. And yet they really kind of wanted to have that credential. So we offered them the opportunity to take the courses that they were taking at NJCU, map them back to the courses at the community college. And then when they finished those 60 credits, they would get the associate's degree from the appropriate community college, and as well as continue on their way to finish their bachelor's degree at NJCU.
So that's the reverse.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's the reverse transfer.
Yes, it is.
So you kind of go back. And so why is it important? Why did some students want to have that associate's degree while they're continuing on to get a bachelor's degree?
So many students who go to community colleges are first in their family. And so having this credential gives them one more step up. It's another encouragement to say, let's keep going, let's get it. And the other piece of it is, quite frankly, at least they have the associate's degree. If life gets in the way and they have to stop out for the four-year institution, they can at least say, yep, look, I got this associate's degree. So it's a marker that says to everyone, this is how far you've gotten.
Got it. Sounds really important. Now, what's the dual admit program?
So the dual admit program has the same concept in that what we try to make sure that we help students do is to understand that finishing a four-year degree is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And that takes a lot of time. You get tired along the way, life gets in the way, your family responsibilities get in the way. So what we wanted to do is to offer the students the smoothest way to get from their admission to the community college all the way to the four-year degree. The other reason students very often will choose this dual admit is that, quite frankly, it's cheaper. You can go to a community college for a lot less than what you would do to go to the four-year institution. And having taught at a two-year institution, I would say that two-year institutions absolutely positively focus, laser-like, on those freshman and sophomore level courses, trying to ensure that the students are successful. So you get a little more tender loving care than you might get at a four-year institution, although many four-year institutions are good at it. So the dual admit has a lot of reasons why it helps students to get through with that, what I call that marathon for the bachelor's degree.
Yeah, it's interesting. I went to two community colleges. I went to Pikes Peak Community College in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Diablo Valley College, which is a junior college in Pleasant Hill, California. And it was always interesting. Sometimes the instructors I had there were actually better than when I got to a four-year school because they knew they were passionate about teaching and passionate about their subject, and they were really great. Now, when it comes to the dual admit program and the reverse transfer program, is this something a board member, a trustee, or a regent can support or help champion if an institution isn't doing it yet?
Oh, absolutely. And again, one of the purposes of it is to understand if your student population that lives in your community or in your region comes from family from very modest means, they may not be able to afford to do 4 years at a four-year institution, and dual admit is a wonderful way to do that. The reverse transfer was an attractive way for us to take students who were very eager to come to us before they finished their associate's degree, but to say to him, look, you can get that credential. And quite frankly, it helps two-year institutions with their graduation rates, which, as you know, are one of the factors that go into whether you're succeeding or not as an institution. So it's supportive of the two-year institution, it's supportive of the family, and it helps the community.
Do 2 years ever institutions ever push back because they don't want to lose the revenue? They'd rather
Oh,
keep the student.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But this is for students who just on their own decided to come early.
Yeah.
So, and it gave us a chance to go back to the two-year institution and say, look, why don't we go ahead and do this because it'll help you with your graduation rates.
Right. And it's best for the students. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of your work in your history, you talked about working at a two-year institution, the colleges you've been associated with. You've really been doing a lot of work to help the social mobility of students.
Mhm.
Where do you think presidents and boards can kind of get off track when it comes to serving their students in their communities this way?
So
That's not a completely leading question at all.
So one of the really important data points that I learned probably 8 years ago, because I'm a mathematician by training, so I love data, is that 2/3 of the students in this country who are going to be going to school in the next 15 years, 2/3 of them, come from the bottom two socioeconomic classes. They are largely minority, and they come from families who may not have gone to college themselves. So they're underprepared for college, and they can't pay for it. So we have a responsibility, I think, to figure out a much more equitable way to ensure that the future of this country is educated and is ready to take on and be leaders. And so to do that, we financially and financially, as well as in the way we teach, are going to have to make sure that we can help these students who come from modest means. We were very proud of the fact that both at Queens College as well as at NJCU, we were ranked very high in the social mobility. And the social mobility says, okay, what social class did you start with when you entered college? And then when you're 5 years out, how much are you making?
Right. Now, a lot of college presidents, in order to move up in their career, want to increase their prestige, and social mobility doesn't seem to be the way to do that. What are some encouragements board members can give to go, yeah, we know that this isn't sexy, but it's really the right thing to do? What
One
can
of
board
the
members
things
do?
that
Yeah.
that's an excellent question. And one of the things I kept pointing out to the board, although my board was always, both boards, both at NJCU as well as Queens College, were both very supportive of understanding the role of social mobility. But one of the things I pointed out more than once is how bright many of these students were. They may not have had the same training or the kind of support that I had when I was growing up by my parents, who both had college degrees, to say, these are the things you need to do. But they were very bright, and they are part of what I think is going to make this country a very innovative place.
It's interesting how people assume that if you're at a two-year school, you're lacking in something. And my experience, as similar as yours, has always been that there's incredibly bright, incredibly talented, really driven students, regardless of the age, at the community colleges, and they don't deserve the rap they get. So that's always curious to me. Yeah.
You have only to look, and at Queens College, we had done a good job of tracking our alumni, and we went back and looked at where our students started from and where they ended up. And story after story after story, because nobody ever came to Queens College because they had money. They typically were bright, but they couldn't afford to go anywhere else, so they went to Queens. And they ended up being vice presidents at JP Morgan. And quite frankly, this individual spent his first 6 months after graduation from college living in a car because that's all he and his wife could afford. But now he's doing quite well.
Wow, that's a movie.
Yeah.
I bet there's a lot of movies. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's part of what makes America what it is.
Agreed. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I know that, to have a thriving democracy, we need to close the education attainment gap.
Yep.
Otherwise, we're setting ourselves up for some big trouble.
Mhm.
Switching gears here a bit, one of the big jobs for a president is fundraising.
Mhm.
And you were president for 10 years, but you're also the head of institutional advancement at Queens College. What do most people not understand about fundraising for colleges and universities? What do we think it is compared to what it actually is?
So I love what fundraising does. It actually takes people who have done quite well and connects them in a way that they are investing in the future of their community. The gentleman who gave to Queens College, he graduated with physics and he helped to design and build the atomic bomb. That's when he came along, and his family were immigrants to the country. So he went on to build an incredibly successful company. But at the end of the day, we pitched him, would you like to give to the physics department at Queens College, or would you like to give to the arts? He said, I will tell you, physics gave me my livelihood, but the arts has given me my life. I lived in Queens, and I want to help the Center for the Arts at Queens College. And that's why it's called after the Kufferbergs. I'll call out one that's right here in Boulder. The Boulder School of Business is named after Leeds. She's actually that family. She's a graduate of Queens College. They started with nothing and have gone on to be highly successful, but their commitment was always to invest in the future. And you see that, I think, in the School of Business there at the Leeds School of Business at CU Boulder.
Is it always important to get those big fish, or no. Do we need to take care of the smaller fish as well?
Absolutely.
And that's a terrible analogy, but you get
So one of the things that's most important about fundraising is that you get the percentage of alumni or friends of the university that you giving back. And that's actually a data point that's used in some rankings for institutions. And so you want to try to get as many of your alumni giving back. And whether it's $50 or $5 or $100, whatever you can give back is important. And that shows a real commitment. I know that there is a woman at NJCU who doesn't have a lot of means, but she would come to every alumni event we had. She came to the United States from India, went to school at NJCU, loved her degree, and gives regularly. And she is someone who I'm deeply indebted to, not because of the volume of what she gets, but because of her commitment. She's willing to come back and help students, as well as, like I said, write those checks.
How can board members, now at private colleges and universities, there tends to be more of an expectation that board members are donors, less so for public college boards.
Correct.
But what can public college boards in this case, or even private college boards, do to help you as a president or institutional advancement with your fundraising efforts?
So I'll give the example that Matthew Goldstein, who was in charge of the system at CUNY, did. He and Benno Schmidt, who is the chair of the board there, worked really hard to engage the leaders in New York City. Now, I have always said there's 500 really wealthy people in New York City or more, but, and if you can get 50 of them to get on the bandwagon with you. And again, giving was about investing. And that was the comment that what Matthew worked on was he said, we're going to make a compact. If you can give us this, we'll return you that on investment. Whether it was working with an accounting firm, huge, one of the big 5 accounting firms, saying, if you can invest in this, I promise you that our graduates will come and help to fill the ranks of your employees.
So tapping into, one, their sense of community pride and also maybe a little bit of their self-interest. Nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it must be harder for colleges that do work with students that do not come from means to get those bigger checks. A college like, bigger colleges that have been around for a long time, there's more time to have people build wealth.
Right. So typically, to be able to get a large gift from someone, you hope that you've been working with them for probably 15 years or so, because they need to trust you and understand where the institution is going and why it's going the direction it's going in. The other reason, quite frankly, is that it takes them a while to amass enough, of an income to be able to want to give back. So we had go ahead.
No, please. You had an
We
individual.
had an individual at NJCU who helped create the Unix system that is in yours and my computer. But again, he started with very little and he's gone on to be highly successful. So,
How important? Now, you came out of institutional advancement before you were hired as a president.
mhm.
When boards and when regents or trustees or whatever they're called, wherever they are, that's always a question they have. How can this individual work with donors? What do you think boards should think about or consider when looking at presidential candidates around that fundraising aspect?
So I think that presidents, quite frankly, deans, some vice presidents, and some faculty need to understand that it's a relationship. People who have money are investing in you, and they want to know that the investment is going to have the right return. Whether that right return is we've gotten more students to graduate on time, or we have a new arts center that's going to help the borough of Queens. Whatever it is, you want to know that the investment has returned in what the donor wants.
Got it. Again, switching gears, we're just covering a lot of great topics today. You were involved with legislators and other elected officials to find individuals to serve on your board of trustees in New Jersey. What qualifications are you generally looking for when it comes to trustees?
So I would find that the legislators, as well as community members and business people, alumni, helped us find individuals who had skills that we were lacking. We needed to make sure you want to make sure you have someone who's very good at finance. You want to make sure that you have someone who understands the academic programming. So 2 of the board members at NJCU were actually professors at other institutions, and it could help us to make sure that, okay, this is you're headed in the right direction here in terms of some of the things that you're working on academically. So whether it's programmatically or understanding what the community needs. One of our individuals was a local developer and helping us understand how we ensured that we had minority firms working as we were working on projects at NJCU was important.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Colorado is one of 4 states that elect their regents. And having gone to two community colleges and graduated from the University of Colorado Springs, the smallest of the campuses in the system, I would never have made it through that process, but my experience helped bring a different perspective to the board. I certainly hope. But I get how we look to engineer boards to serve your needs as a president and the needs of an institution.
Yep. One of the things that I was very pleased with that the NCAA has is they had student members of their board. NJCU had a student member, as did CUNY. They couldn't vote on financial matters, but they were there. Their perspectives were very important.
Did you face, we know watching the press, reading things, different states are having different experiences with this, but I mentioned politics. A lot of times governors are getting more involved in appointing people to boards for political reasons. Did you face any of that pressure? And if so, how did you work with it? If not, how would you work with that?
So at NJCU, absolutely not. Our legislators are actually very helpful in helping us identify people that were going to fit a need that we had. And so I was thrilled with the work that happened. I know at CUNY that Matthew worked pretty carefully to make sure that the people on his board were helpful, as well as Ben O'Smith. And that was a board that had to be careful that it worked with 2 things. CUNY gets its funding from the state as well as from the city. And sometimes the governor of New York is not always in line with the mayor of New York, even though 80% of the tax revenues every year come from New York City because it's New York City.
New York is a very complicated.
It's very complicated.
So how would you think, or have you talked to other presidents that dealt with more politically active?
I did have a colleague in New Jersey that was a president of a institution, and he had to compromise sometimes. If you have 12 people on your board, you might have 2 of them there that were political appointments, and that's what you did. So, yeah.
What do you wish you knew when you started as president about dealing with trustees, and at the end that you wish you knew at the beginning?
Okay, so that's an excellent question. My past experience had always been working in a system where the president wasn't directly dealing with the board. At NJC, you dealt with your board. I had a great board. They were incredibly supportive. We worked really hard to communicate. About halfway through my tenure, my 10 years, we realized we needed to change the structure of how the board operated because there weren't enough people who were on the committees for us to be able to get significant work done. So we restructured it in a way that I think made it much more productive. And that helped a lot. So communications is very, very, very important. I'm now taking some training on how to be on a board, and I've learned a nice catchphrase. It's called, a board should be noses in, fingers out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What did you learn along the way that you wish you knew when you started the president about dealing with the board? Is it communication? Is it were there any lessons like, oh, that would have been helpful?
Communication. Yeah. And helping the board to be the strategic leader with you. Not that I don't think the board wasn't, I think they were very strategic in saying, okay, this is what your predecessor did. This is the direction we need to be headed in. You're living in a new era. We'll have to adjust it based on that era. So,
yeah. So my experience as a board member is sometimes the university is going in a direction that might be off mission. And so if you say fingers out, what was the first phrase?
It's noses in, fingers out.
Noses in. How do you encourage or gently nudge? And it's like a president, like, nope, we're going reputation building. Nope, we're going to do elephant hunting. No, it's like, well, that's not quite, and it's not enough. Like I never felt I had a great president when I was a regent. So this isn't diminishing that person, but how do you nudge that person? Because it's certainly not worth the disruption of letting that person go.
Well, I think as if you're asking how the board needs to do it, the committee structure is a great way to do it. But again, the idea that the board leads the basic strategy, and it's a lot of conversations. It might be retreats that you do. We always did retreats. We had those where the board was like, okay, this is where we're headed. This is what we need to be doing. And the board had to look at two things. Was one, how are we operating as a board? And is that type of operation effective to be able to set that kind of strategy so that the CEO, the president, knows what to do? And
I found it
provide that support that the president needs.
Yeah, I always felt like part of my job as a regent, as a trustee, was to go like, my job is to make you successful as president. That's my entire job. Like if the president wins, the university wins, and we all win. So I do feel that's a really important role for a board member.
Yeah.
What was it like to go through that committee restructuring? Because that makes a lot of sense to me. Sometimes, if a committee structure is X years old, the university has grown, the community needs have changed, and we need to relook at that. And I know it's painful and messy, and we were involved in that, but how was that process, and how would you encourage people to go about it?
The board was thrilled. And the reason was, rather than having like 4 or 5 committees, we got it down to 2. And the way the structure is set up in the state of New Jersey, if you have more than half your members there, you have a quorum, and suddenly it has to be a public meeting. So we always had to get the committees to be 1 less than quorum. And yet you wanted enough people there to have a good dialogue so that the board could really help guide the discussion. So
yeah, and each state has its own sunshine laws. Colorado's much more open than, like, if you have 2 elected officials, you need to let if it's a meeting talking about official business, you have to let people know. What advice would you give trustees or regents in dealing with a new president? You talked about support. What are some things that they can do to make that transition time easier for the incoming president?
So one of the things, and I'm going to give 2 stories. One is what the board did for me, which I was thrilled. They said, why don't you go and take some of the training sessions they have for new presidents? Harvard does some, American Council of Education does some. Those are all very, very helpful to me for 2 reasons. One, I got the nuts and bolts of what I need to understand, what I hadn't learned. And the other piece of it, it gave me some colleagues around the country to pick up the phone and ask a question. This crazy thing happened today. What would you suggest that I do? So those are wonderful opportunities. And then the other thing, and I'll kind of quote again this gentleman I'm working with this board work, he talked about the fact that particularly during the pandemic, that boards had to help the CEOs more with emotional support because the job was changing every day. And I would say higher ed in many ways is changing every day. If you look at the Chronicle any given day, it's just always one new thing to have to worry about. And presidents are responsible for worrying about those.
So let's talk about that for a second. I'm an executive coach. I've coached high-level academics. I've coached high-level C-suite executives. And what you shared about being a president, about having that network, how lonely does it get sometimes as the president? Because it's not like you have a lot of colleagues in your immediate circle that you can share with. What's that like for you, and how can a board support the president that way?
Well, that's where the board, again, where that communication is important. I had a great chair. He was somebody that you could pick up the phone and call him and bounce some ideas off of. We met regularly, as I also met with a lot of members. I've made a point of meeting with every member of the board, periodically, so that everybody could understand one-on-one way what's really bothering you that you won't even bring up in a committee meeting. So I felt like that was very, very important that we over communicated with one another. The other piece of it is, and this happened a lot during COVID, when a lot of things are happening and you don't know what to do, having the board perhaps meet more frequently would be very helpful thing to do. Again, you have to work around what kind of sunshine laws you have in your state about what you can do and can't do. But I think that that's a very important thing. I know that Matthew worked very closely with Benno Schmidt. And because of that, CUNY as a system, and I hope somebody writes a book about it someday, really changed a lot under the leadership, both of that board as well as that chancellor.
So you think the board should really be sure that they're paying attention to the mental well-being sounds a little extreme, but you get the point of the president to make sure that they're doing okay?
Yeah. I think trying to figure out supportive and what kind of things that they might need. So,
what advice would you give a trustee or regent so they could be the best board member possible?
Oh, well, again, I'm going to go back with the noses in, fingers out. And to understand that your role as a board member is to help drive the strategy, and that your job is to help this institution understand, work with it, what the strategy needs to be, broad strategy. And then it's the job of the CEO to implement that strategy. And it's the job of the people on campus, as well as alumni and everybody else, to get into the tactical things. But a board should not be doing tactical things at all. Now, it should be assessing as you move along, which my board did as well as at CUNY. We were responsible for reporting every year. What got done? Did we make progress? We didn't. Or we need to adjust on.
What about continuing ed for board members? I've talked to Robert Scott, who's a former college president like yourself, and he shared that 15% of higher ed board members have some background in higher ed. You having two former president or professors or current professors elsewhere on your board is very atypical, right? How do you want me as a board member to learn more about the business of higher education and how it works and the culture and how it's unique and it's different than business and how it has different values?
When I became president, my board chair and myself, and I think the vice chair, went to an AGB conference, and that was very helpful. And AGB actually helped us reorient how we did our board structure. I think it was either AGB or ASCU. So working with professional organizations, but they also, I think they need training. If there's professional coaching that can be provided, that's just very helpful to help them understand how they can be more powerful in terms of their way of helping with the strategy without getting into the tactical part of it.
Got it. Speaking of understanding how higher education works, something that is very top of mind for people is the NCAA. As I mentioned in your introduction, you served on the Board of Governors. What is the NCAA Board of Governors and what do they do?
Okay, so the NCAA Board of Governors, real quick recap, NCAA was started under Teddy Roosevelt because The people who were playing the football games on Saturday for Harvard and Yale and all those other were not students. They were paid. Most of them were longshoremen. And they would play for Harvard on Thursday, and then they'd play for Yale on Saturday. And because there were no safety precautions, they were getting killed. There were no safety precautions. They were paid employees. They weren't students. And Teddy Roosevelt brought in the presidents and said, this isn't working. I need for you to create an organization that oversees to ensure that the athlete is a student. So it's the collegiate model, that they are not paid, and that they are safe. So the NCAA at the very outset of it is made up of the board of governors, is made up of presidents from Division 1, 2, and 3. It's also made up of students. And thanks to a report done by Condoleezza Rice, we have 5 what they call independent board members on there. Ken Chenault was one of them. I was on the search committee that found the first 5. He was past CEO of American Express. He was one of the individuals who asked in his interview, what are you going to do with the fact that the upcoming students that are coming to college come from low socioeconomic classes and they may not be able to go to sports campuses in the summer? So, how is the NCAA going to change? But at the root of it, the NCAA is about making sure that the students are safe, that the rules are fair, and they are consistent across all of the United States.
Okay.
And the difficulty I think that the NCAA is having now is that with the idea of being able to offer financial incentives to students, there's no federal guideline around that. There's only state, which gets into some complications.
Right. Well, the U.S. Labor Board has ruled that college athletes are employees.
Yes.
So that could be a federal thing coming down the pike?
That's correct.
Certainly would make things interesting.
Yes.
What should boards know about the workings of the NCAA?
My recommendation is they look at why the NCAA was started. You want to make sure that the NCAA continues to create rules and regulations that keep students safe. I was on the NCAA board when they brought in a gentleman to become the Sports Science Institute. He did a lot of research with the Department of Defense and determined that certain factors, certain ways that you either do sports, whether it's football, soccer, etc., would cause concussions. And he came to the board and said, we have to change the rule immediately. Now, rule changing in the NCAA required consensus by everyone, which meant it took a long time. And they pushed back and said, no. He said, no, if you don't change this rule, then everybody's going to get sued because we now have the evidence to show that this kind of tackle is more likely to cause concussion. So they changed the rule very quickly. And immediately there were 600 cases, which, by the way, the NCAA covers. They cover any class action lawsuit that has to do with rules that the NCAA has, and the student still gets hurt. So,
okay.
Anyway,
what's the passion seem to run particularly high around basketball and football? What advice would you have for presidents that are dealing with board members that are the most passionate about perhaps athletics?
So I think you have to understand the balance between athletics and academics and what value athletics brings. There's a lot of research that shows athletes make great leaders once they've graduated, but there has to be a balance. They still have to get an education. And one of the things the NCAA did probably 10 or 15 years ago is said, you can't let them out without a good education. So that's why they have a lot of rules and regulations now around what GPA you have to have and what's the rigor of the degree that they're getting.
Okay. I won't ask you to speculate on where this is going because no one knows, and it's way too complicated for this conversation. Talking about what regents and trustees do or don't know, I think many, because they don't have an academic background, are not clear about the accreditation process. Mm-hmm. What are accrediting bodies? What should regents and trustees know? How does the accreditation process work? Why is that important?
So accreditation for an institution ensures that they can continue to get federal funding for student aid. If you are not accredited, your students will not be able to file for the grants that come in from the federal government. So an institution needs to be accredited at the very root of it. Accreditation is based on determining who you are as an institution. In other words, you say who you are, this is your mission, these are things you're going to be doing to meet that mission, and then have you assess that you've actually done what you're going to be saying you're doing. And are you financially viable?
Who's on those accrediting bodies?
The accrediting bodies typically are presidents and vice presidents. Middle states had on it some presidents from large institutions, small institutions, and then they had individuals. For example, the CFO of one institution that was in New Jersey is also on there because he could look at the books and say, well, this is what good looks like, this is what good doesn't. There's a gentleman from West Point who is very familiar with assessment, who could help us understand whether assessment was good or not.
How often does a university or college go through accreditation? And
every 5 years. Every 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
and how much?
Go ahead.
How much time does that take from staff?
It's a year-long process, and there's follow-up. To give you an example, oh my gosh, I've gone through accreditation a lot. The last one I did at NJCU, we started the year before. Everybody on campus involved on it, including the board. You need to understand there are 10, there's usually about 10 different criteria that you have to report on. You get the criteria up. It's a written report that then goes in, and then a visiting team comes. The visiting team is made up of presidents and vice presidents from various institutions that are in your accrediting body. And they aren't necessarily on the commission. They could just be individuals. They read the report, they interview people on campus, and then they determine if you said you did what you did you actually do it? And what are some things that you need to work on, or what things are you particularly good at? So
some people are critical of some of the accrediting bodies of really reinforcing the status quo when it comes to how universities go about their business. And I understand some professional schools have their own particular accreditation as well,
yes,
which might encourage silos rather than interdisciplinary work.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share what your thoughts are of those critiques?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of one of them that I'm a little more familiar with. There's a AA accreditation that you can have as a business school. And initially, to be AA accredited, which is the highest accreditation for a business school, you had to make sure that your faculty were really doing deep research. And they kind of stepped back from that and said, well, not every institution in the country needs to have faculty who are doing the latest research, because there's not that many of them out there doing that much research. But we need a lot of them who are good researchers, but also very good teachers. And so they sort of backed off. And I think you'll find that a lot of accrediting bodies, have tried to adjust as life has gone on and figured out what the new normal is and where we need to be going. But accreditation, whether it's accreditation for schools of education or whether it's nursing accreditation, they're usually pretty rigorous. And then there's the institutional accreditation.
Okay, so what should trustees or regents know? They just know what's going on? Yeah.
They need to understand what good looks like under accreditation, whether it's accreditation for a particular school, and they need to understand what good looks like, and then how can they support the institution to ensure that they are accredited.
Right. Should they read the accreditation reports? Should they read the summary?
It'd probably be helpful for them to read the summary.
I'm glad you said that, because I saw one of ours was like,
it's a snooze.
I think a few of it's like, holy cow, that's a lot of information.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of information. I'm looking at my questions here. We've covered a lot of them. Switching back to advice for board members, what do you wish board members would do more of in general? Not particular to your board, because that's not fair, but in general, you've talked to a lot of your peers around the country, and I'm sure board complaints are common. So what do you think, besides not getting in the weeds, what do you wish they would do more of?
So one of the things that's really great is when board members are engaged on campus, because it really, it means they might come to an athletic event, or they might come to an arts event. And the interesting thing would be, for me, somebody who is very passionate about athletics, will have them show up for one of the ballet performances. try to learn a little bit more about things that they don't know about on the institution to understand that it's a very complex organization. So being involved on campus, I think, is very important. And the other thing is lending their expertise.
Yeah.
Many of them are fantastic at what they do, and having them come and speak in camp to our students. So
how do you, how important is it to the university community to see their board members being a guest speaker or showing up?
Huge. It shows that the board is supportive of the institution and that they want to be engaged.
And is that help morale?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's good for me as a board member to learn more about the institution. It's good for the institution.
Absolutely. Again, knowing that the board member very often will have to remember that they are noses in, fingers out. So if the faculty member or the student or somebody wants to come and bend their ear about something, they listen politely. And
and what do I do with that? Do I share it with you? Do I share it with who do I share that?
I think it's that important, but not for nothing. The same thing happens to vice presidents on campus as well as presidents. It's the water cooler, I don't like what Sam did yesterday. Okay. Yeah. Is there anything that I didn't ask in our conversation that you'd like to add before I ask my last question? No.
We covered a lot of really great ground really quickly. You're very, very precise, which was super terrific. Last question I like to ask all my guests. What is it you like most about working in higher education?
So it's interesting. They always say if you have a passion for what you do, you don't work a day in your life. And I have always had a passion for education. My parents are both educators, K-12, as well as actually most of my family, extended family. The thing about higher education is that it is making a difference in society. It's making a difference in people's lives. And it's helping to create knowledge, help drive innovation, and train future leaders.
And that's a great business to be involved with. It's great mission focused. Yeah.
It's exciting.
So. Sue, I really appreciate your time. This is a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.